Hey, what's up? Dave with Brazos Valley Strength. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of new people here to watch this video or get the free program. So I wanted to take a second to talk about what I'm really doing with this block or the free program in general, the free programs that I give away. I currently, and for the foreseeable future, have been and will continue to give away every program that I do for free. So this is not really an exception. This is not necessarily a power building hypertrophy block specifically designed for anyone besides myself. It's just an extension of the programming that I would have been running anyway. And so that's the important thought here, is that the stuff that you're seeing right now in the training or that you can watch in this video, obviously, and take it from the free program, is just stuff that I'm writing for myself, right? So I think that there have been people that have done very, very well with this programming, but the point is that it's not designed for anyone besides myself. So with these videos, my idea here is to give me an opportunity to break down my training concepts overall and give me a better opportunity to explain some things practically that I'm doing and how I'm thinking about training in a year-round flow. So right now, I just finished my biggest competition of the year, so I'm moving into more of a hypertrophy kind of phase. And specifically, as I still have room to grow into my new weight class, I still have probably 4 or 5 kilos that I could gain. So a lot of my investment over the next, a year, 2 years is really going to be hopefully putting on more muscle mass. And ideally, a lot of that muscle mass is really going to be my upper body. But I think that's where I'm going to have a lot more to say overall in this program, because I have had my share of aches and pains and injuries mostly around my upper body. And so a lot of the programming here will reflect that. So currently, I'd say my overall strategy is to be doing a little bit more competition benching without really high RPEs overall, right? Just kind of a good amount of moderate volume. A lot of my bigger kind of compound movements for hypertrophy, like we see right here with the overhead pressing, is going to be more shoulder oriented, kind of shoulders and arms. And a lot of that has been because my pecs tend to get beat up so easily from a lot of horizontal pressing, from just, general wear and tear. So I'm going to be doing some chest hypertrophy during this program, but I think that might be somewhere that I would actually lean towards a little bit more chest stuff rather than as much of the overhead pressing that I'm doing. I've found that overhead pressing has been totally beneficial for increasing my bench press, so it's not something that I really think is a negative trade-off for me, that I don't think that I'm losing a lot of value here. But if I were writing this program for somebody else on either day 1 or day 3, I would have probably chosen a different exercise that targets the chest a little bit more rather than just the overhead pressing. So if that's something that you as the individual want to change with this program, then certainly go for it. So I'll try to pick out those spots that I think are definitely more unique to myself. And this is one of them right here. Is this cable press around is an exercise that I've seen maybe gaining a little bit more popularity recently, and I'm trying to include exercises that I think can train my chest some, as much as I can without beating it up very much. And this is one that I've seen people doing. It shouldn't be super stressful on my pecs. It's not loaded in it's not very heavy in the lengthened position, which is probably the thing that beats me up the most. But to be honest, I don't know that I'm sold on this one. I've been doing it for a couple weeks now, even when I was off program, just messing around with this one to see if it was one that I thought would work well in my program. And I think my thoughts right now are maybe. So I'm gonna keep doing it. But if you're somebody who has access to, something like even just a pec deck or cable flies or something like that, that may be a great thing to include there as well. Or you can use that one. But essentially, it's just supposed to be lighter loading, higher volume that I can do training the pec in the shortened position, which don't do a whole lot of. So maybe I'll probably keep it around for the whole block, but it's not something that I think is probably going to be make or break as far as the program design overall. So everything else, we'll see a lot of these pulling kind of exercises on just about every day. Just again getting a lot more back hypertrophy as we go. So I'll flow right into this day since we're already here. I'm going to try not to do too much talking overall, just as filler, and talk about places that I think are more important. So I think this is a day that is at least relatively interesting, with it being a 3x5 at a well, I rated these a 5. We'll see that. So by the way, as far as my annotations with what my RPEs and everything, well, we'll see in the bottom left hand corner, I noted what I actually did for my competition lifts. Really, I think that only shows up with bench press, when my RPE at the later in the week gets a little bit weird. For the accessory kind of exercises, I just noted what the program was written, and I think sometimes that shows up if something it's like lateral raises for sets of 12 that are written. Sometimes I'm doing sets of 10. It just like happened to be the load that I'm putting on there. So I'm just not that worried on accessories about being perfect with the rep ranges. I'm trying to get close. So you may see some differences where you can pick out that the rep ranges that I did were different by a little bit than what's in the program. I mean, I'm trying to get close to what's in the program, but I'm not too worried if I'm doing 2 more or 2 less reps on my lateral raises. But on my competition lifts, I'm trying to note those a little bit more precisely, at least for you guys. So the big deal here is that I basically had to take about 2 weeks off of training after nationals. My first week I came back, it was vacation for a little bit. Then I had COVID that wiped me out for the rest of the week. Last week was more so just kind of pump work to get back into shape, but I really have not done any competition lifts since nationals. So about 2 weeks of no squat, bench, or deadlifting. So a lot of the loads that we see here are me just kind of getting back into shape. So as far as the competition squats on this day, I wanted to hopefully have enough reps, so the 3x5 here with the pause squats, to help just maintain a little bit more of my connection to the movement overall. As you see, just trying to do these nice and controlled. I'm really not going to be trying to challenge the load a whole lot on this day. I don't think that if you're doing this program, this should be a spot that you're really trying to go crazy with. Just use this as practice. Just do nice and clean squats. Over time, as they're getting up to a 6 RPE, they should be relatively challenging near the end of the block. I mean, you should have to try a little bit with them. But for the most part, we want to save the energy for the stuff after it. So throughout the course of the block, this day is really just meant to be practice. I found this kind of moderate rep range, kind of 4 to 6 or so, really helps me get into a flow with my squatting and just really feel kind of connected to the technique that I want to have. I'll talk about some of like the strength stuff later in the training week when we get there. So as far as the main change for my quad hypertrophy is I'm doing these belt squats with bands with a much closer stance, at least for me. So this stance feels super close, but the bands are making it to where it's a little bit lighter down at the very bottom, hopefully maybe saving my knees just a little bit. But these bands tend to hit right around the midpoint, right? Almost right around parallel. And so it makes it from the midpoint all the way up that my quads are having to work a whole lot harder. So essentially the concept here for hypertrophy work, not so much for strength, I don't buy into it as much there, that for hypertrophy work, if we can match the strength curve of the exercise, it's generally speaking, let's say squatting is going to be extremely hard down at the bottom and it gets easier as we go up. So if we can make it to where the machine kind of matches that curve to where it's a little bit lighter at the bottom and then it gets a little bit heavier at the top, we can conceptually at least keep those muscles working harder through the entire range of motion. So it's not something that I do all the time. I don't think it's something that people need to do all the time, but it's certainly a useful tool for hypertrophy. So I'm going to come back to these back extensions. I know I'm already running out of time here. I do them later in the week so I can talk about specifics of what we're looking for on those. So now I've already talked more than I really expected to. I don't think that this bench press day really has much to say at all. This is just going to be a little bit more kind of higher rep bench press. Again, with the high reps, I'm going to be trying to choose a load that's challenging and makes me work, but isn't going to be, I shouldn't really be getting near to failure specifically on the competition bench, but all of the other work on this day, the overhead press and the push-ups that we'll see, a lot of those are where I'm going to be working significantly harder and getting much closer to failure on those. So of all the days this week, my deadlift day actually ended up being the most kind of awkward and weird. I expected to have a pretty big drop off in strength, and that definitely happened, but that's not really any sort of concern. But I think it's worth at least mentioning a few things here is that I ended up only working up to a single at 300 kilos, after 2 weeks ago pulling nearly 400 kilos. And I think that this is one of the big areas. I mean, post-competition, obviously, people should be not that worried about what numbers they're hitting right away. But in general, in these blocks overall, if we're planning on pushing a lot of volume all around, there's a pretty good chance that our competition lifts are not going to feel all that great. I mean, here, week one, there's definitely different reasons why. I mean, I'm just really detrained. But as the block goes, even if I have some RPE7, RPE8 singles on things, I should not be gauging the success of this block based on those singles, right? Because if I expected my singles to be getting significantly better during these blocks, then I would expect this style of training, right? Like this amount of volume, these higher reps and everything. Or I guess what I'm saying is that if I'm gauging my singles too critically here, then I'm also for some reason operating with the assumption that this volume is super productive at my top end, and then why wouldn't I do this heading into competitions? And that's just not the case, right? So clearly this is a block that I'm doing furthest away from a competition. Immediately after a competition, I'm doing this now because I don't expect this to be something that dramatically improves my competition performance in the short term. I think it's something that will absolutely add up for performance in the long run, but it's not something that I need to be too critical of right now. That the actual loads, especially for singles and competition lifts, I just can't be too critical there. So week one, I would not be critical anyway, but as the block goes, we should be hitting numbers that at least are good, but maybe not great, I think, by any means. So this day actually ended up being a little bit weird for me, besides just being weak, right? I'll hit 300 kilos here on my next one, but we'll see. After that, I started having some weird kind of glute pain. So it's something that I have every now and then. It's been the left hip, inside my hip. Squatting, I get kind of a crampy feeling every now and then, but it's really not been something that I've ever had to change my training for, just that it feels uncomfortable at times squatting, and mostly during warm-ups, but it's really never been something that I've thought has mattered. But you'll see here, pretty quickly, I kind of started feeling it, and then I start kind of bailing on some of these reps, because it was really pinching kind of bad at the top. So, this session is meant to just be getting going, and the plan here was to drop, really light and then ascend back up to these fives. And I ultimately wasn't able to do that. So I tried to do this set. It was really just feeling pretty bad, like above the knees. And this rep that I'm about to do was not very good. It still felt pretty bad. So I decided, okay, maybe I'll keep my lockout soft. I'll just try to get into a groove. And ultimately it ended up being okay. But I only did this 220 kilos for all my sets rather than working up. And I think this is an important concept, especially post-competition or post-time off in general, right? If you go on a vacation for a week or so, or you just have to miss some training, the fact that we are detrained a lot of times ends up increasing some of our sensitivity in some places. And just because I'm fresh right now, my fatigue is low, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm really prepared to train all that well. And so sometimes people get these like weird, kind of surprising, in quotes, injuries, little pulled muscles here and there. And I think people underestimate how much training actually makes you resilient against more training. So, it wasn't super surprising that I had some issues here starting off. It's not something that I'm really concerned about at all. It tends to be that I almost always actually in some of these blocks tend to pull a muscle in like my mid back in the first week or two. So I've avoided that. So maybe this is just my little injury for now. And you see, I was able to actually do some training. So I'm really not expecting this to be a big issue. But anyway, deadlifts conceptually, I've been having more success with a little bit higher reps and higher volume. So me doing, like 5 sets of 5 here or something that I felt like I was more comfortable pushing right now. And then you'll see like the competition squats, the volume stays low and I'm pushing things like belt squats other places because I don't think that I'm going to get a ton of effective quad hypertrophy. I would say most people won't in squatting, but clearly me and my squat style is probably less conducive to hypertrophy than something like the belt squat is. So that's the main reason for the shift there overall with the programming. So anyway, my first week was weird deadlifting, but I'm not expecting it to really be an issue. So I'm gonna start talking about the back extensions since we're here. The big thing with these back extensions that you'll see me doing is really rounding my upper back. If you have a 45-degree back extension, I would say that that's probably better. You see me kind of trying to mimic a 45-degree back extension with the knees a little bit bent. But the big thing is that we're really trying to focus on hip extension and not back extension. So really rounding the upper back and trying to really kind of extend your hips into the pad, almost rounding your back. I like the cue of having a string connected to your mid back. You can kind of see how the mid back is pulling up to the ceiling rather than my head and shoulders. And that really helps with that hip extension. So the main goal there is glute hypertrophy overall, just general kind of hip extension strength. Again, I think this is an exercise that has gained some popularity, more so recently with guys like Chance Mitchell really posting about him a whole lot more. I think it's a good exercise. I think that it's a great hinge strengthening, hamstring, glute strengthening exercise. I don't know that I would rank it above something like an RDL or a stiff leg deadlift, but I think it has a really low barrier to entry. And I think it's something that, again, we can train really, really hard for probably more sets and keep the intensity, we can kind of go closer to failure with it more so than a stiff leg deadlift or an RDL comfortably. And so right now that may be a good exercise for me to push. So as we're getting into the bench pressing here, I'm actually going to talk about my bench press and my squatting together because the concepts, I guess, are the same. Is that I'm working up to a single on both and then a bunch of sets of doubles after it. So this is the main day where I expected this 175 kilos to be easier. It's supposed to be a 6 RP and then was just hard. I'm detrained. Okay, no worries. I still think I chose the right weight. It just kind of was surprisingly hard. Doesn't look that bad, but it was tough. So here and on squatting, you'll see I'm doing 5 doubles here, 4 doubles on squats. And really this is just to allow room to be able to push harder on all of my accessories, but hopefully give myself a good opportunity to practice with heavier weight. But that's not meant to say I'm expecting to have super high performances. It's just saying that I'm trying to get myself back into a good rhythm, a good training shape to where I feel comfortable with the timing, the load of my hands, all of that. So I'm not really thinking that this is going to show up with bench press strength, but I should expect to feel like I'm bench pressing well enough that me going back to more strength training over the next few blocks, heading into the corrupted strength meet, that I should be prepared to transition to those things because I've had enough practice with it. So almost regardless of where my load on squats and bench press end up, I'm just not all that worried about it. Maybe I'll judge that at the end of the block with the block review and see if I kind of accomplish the goal. But I really don't have upper end goals as far as what my expectation is on either of those. I guess just kind of logically, I would be expecting to be hitting numbers that are, we'll say like 5% maybe less than my previous block, which would be fine, right? And that's a very, very rough estimate. So if you're somebody running this block and particularly bench press and squats, you may get a whole lot stronger. That would be fantastic if that happened. But I would say if you are pretty much matching numbers that you would expect to be hitting in an average strength training block while doing all of this other stuff, I think you're in great shape. So these dumbbell chest flies with the chains obviously look kind of funny. I'm sure I put them on my cover photo, but I really, really like these. And I think for the same reasons that I talked about earlier with the little presser rounds, but this I think is a more effective hypertrophy exercise. So same as the belt squats, right? Kind of deloading it at the bottom where it's going to be the most challenging for us. and then increasing the load at the top to kind of create constant tension through the whole thing. And these are exceptionally hard. So if you want to set these up, if you want to buy all the stuff that I have, it's the Elite FTS little attachment things there, the blue things connected to it, and then the chains. I don't have a exact number as far as how much, what percentage or anything you should have on the chains versus on the weights, but that it was just kind of, well, for one, is what I had around, but also just kind of anecdotally what felt right. Where down at the bottom it still felt like I was having to work, and then it didn't feel incredibly awkward with the shift away from the as the chain started to get loading. It just felt kind of natural with that transition there overall. So anyway, I think I talked about the squatting already with my breakdown on bench press. That'll be the coming day. I don't think that I have a ton to add there. Obviously, I'm just going to be doing stiff leg deadlifts and then some glute ham raise behind it. But anyway, kind of the same stuff that I've been doing with the more kind of compared to the bench press here. Just practicing competition reps and then pushing harder on exercises that I think will build some hypertrophy. So that should be pretty much the breakdown for the whole block. If you do have any questions on this block, please leave me a comment and I'll try to give you a good enough answer in the capacity that I can in the comment section. But I'll be breaking down this block hopefully near the end. Well, maybe not. I have some plans for the end of the block, so we'll see. A different video may actually take over instead of this little block review. But I'm going to continue to be putting out all of my free programs, and from now into the corrupted strength meet, I have 3 blocks. So this one and then 2 more. So if you start now, you'll get that little progression. But I'm going to continue year round to be putting out these programs and giving you a little bit of a breakdown and what the expectations are. So anyway, if you did like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll see you next time.